Imagine if you could take your brain and then turn it inside out, and then have access to the information to be able to solve virtually any problem. It sounds pretty cool, right? Well, here's how. We're going to take a look at problem solving in a very different way, one that can bring tremendous benefit to your life. And this is a technique I was first introduced to at the age of 12 when I began studying the art form of magic. And I've continued to develop it throughout my professional career. And now, best of all, this will be able to work for you in your personal life, professional, or to help you create that next billion-dollar idea. And in any field, sales, marketing, show business, it doesn't matter. Now, throughout this talk, I'm going to be revealing to you 3 core psychological principles that magicians have been using for more than 5,000 years. And all of these principles have one thing in common. They all revolve around the most important concept in magic, and that is the answer to every problem is hiding in plain sight. So let me explain. Imagine you're seated at a table and you're given a problem to solve using nothing except for these items: a candle, some push pins, and some matches. Now, you've got 60 seconds to figure out how to attach this candle to the wall in a way that, when it's lit, the wax will not drip down onto the table. Okay, so some of you may be familiar with this, but for the rest of you, while you're trying to figure this out, let me give you a little bit of history of where this came from. Now, this is a classic test of creative problem solving developed by the renowned psychologist Dr. Carl Duncker, and it was first published in 1945. But although this is over 3/4 of a century old, Dr. Dunker's assessment of how our cognitive brain solves problems hasn't really changed at all. Again, it's back to what I said earlier. The answer to every problem is hiding in plain sight. You see, the thing is, we look right at the answer, but we rarely see it. And in this case, most people are so consumed with how to attach the candle to the wall using tacks, while the real answer is right in front of them. Do you guys see it? The box. Again, that's what I mean by the answer is hidden in plain sight. And again, the reason we don't think the box is one of the solutions is because it's not presented to us as such. It's locked away in our brain and positioned simply as a container for the pins. Now, Dr. Duncker called this functional fixedness, the cognitive bias that limits a person to using an object only in the way that is traditionally intended. And the same is also true of ideas and concepts. For example, this candlestick problem was presented to you simply as a creative problem-solving test, when in fact, it also had a secondary purpose. It contained a very important clue, one that was hiding in plain sight, which you will need to unlock another facet of your cognitive problem-solving ability. Now, the thing is, you probably didn't notice because you weren't instructed to look for it. So right now, I'm giving you a heads up. There's going to be one more clue hidden during this talk. So pay close attention to every detail. Now, to make all this a lot easier to understand, I've simplified the process into 3 words. The first word is misconceptions. Most people think a difficult problem must have a complex solution. The second word, assumptions. We utilize information based upon prior knowledge and experience, and we don't think beyond those parameters. And the third word is expectations. The answer we expect to find often limits us and does not allow us to see what's really going on. Now, I thought it'd be kind of fun to show you what all 3 of these words look like in action, and then we'll dive into each one in a little bit more detail. So for this here, I've got a few bills, 2, 3, 4, I think $5 here. So here's the goal. The goal is to be able to take these bills. If I can do this properly, we'll actually be able to take them on the count of 3. We go 1, 2, 3 like that, and actually transform into $500. Okay, now I have to say this. I can't promise you'll actually be able to transform money at your fingertips by the end of this talk. But you will be able to utilize these same principles, the same principles I just used to turn $1 bills into $100 bills to solve virtually any problem. All right, so let's break this whole thing down right now, starting with misconceptions. This is the exact same thing that happens with the candlestick problem. You see, most people are so focused on how to attach the candlestick, they can't figure out exactly what's going on with the box. It gets buried in their brains. And what happens, you have to force your brain to reassess everything about the situation, every detail, to bring the information to the surface, and then be able to expand your ability to utilize cognitive thinking. So I've got another little, this is so fun, I can't wait to show you this. So this here is a little thing. So guys, take a look right over here. We've got a couple cards, 6 cards to be exact. Each card is different, and each card has been selected for a very important psychological reason. You'll find out why in just a moment. So right now, I want you to focus on just one card and remember it. Keep repeating the name of your card over and over and over in your mind. You got it? Great. I'm going to turn the cards over, start mixing them up. Now, if I did this correctly, all of you, yes, all of you will have been influenced to choose the exact same card. And I'm going to remove your card right now. Let's see if it worked. So it's pretty crazy, right? So, okay. So how did this happen? Like I said, there is a psychological reason why these cards were selected, but it is not so that all of you would be drawn to the same card. It's so that all of you would focus on only one card and ignore the rest. And that's where the misconception comes in, because what you don't know is that there's actually 2 separate sets of cards. Again, the answer was hiding in plain sight. And the reason you didn't notice is because both sets of cards are actually very similar. So let's say, for instance, in the first spread, you selected the king of clubs. In the second spread, it was replaced by the king of spades. So no matter what card you chose in the first spread, it's not going to show up in the second spread. And to top it all off, you were so focused on your one card, you didn't even notice any of the other cards around it. This is why misconception is so dangerous, and it often makes problem solving take way longer than it really should. All right, now the next idea we're going to tackle is assumptions, and more importantly, false assumptions. So I want you to take a look at this animation right now and tell me, which way is the key rotating? Now, some of you will assume the key is rotating clockwise. Others will assume the key is rotating counterclockwise. And both of those assumptions are wrong. You see, we assume the key is moving in just one direction or the other, but I can assure you it's not. Now, if you're more of a right brain user, you likely see the key rotating to the right. If you're more of a left brain user, you likely see the key rotating to the left. But by switching your thinking from right brain to left brain, you'll be able to shift the direction of the key. Now, this takes a little bit of practice, but the results are almost magical. So, how does this relate to hiding in plain sight? Well, in this situation, our brain thinks and assumes that there's only one of 2 possible answers. The only 2 it readily knows and accepts. The key can rotate right or the key can rotate left. It's inconceivable the key can be rotating in both directions at the same time. But you see, if we really study the image, we realize we don't have enough information to determine the key's direction at all. Because you see, the key is solid black. There's no highlights, shadows, or any other distinguishing marks to give us the appropriate information. Now, our brain fills in these missing pieces, and we assume, because our mind likes to work in an orderly fashion, that what we see is the key rotating in one direction or the other. It doesn't even occur to us that maybe we're missing the relevant information to make an informed decision. And we assume that what our mind tells us, based on the way that it chooses to function at that moment, that our logic is correct. So, the correct answer to this one is simply hiding in plain sight. Depending on your perception, the key rotates in both directions. Now, there's still one more crucial word we need to explore, and that is expectations. The answer we expect to find can blind us to what is actually happening, and this is what makes problem solving so difficult. Now, a great example of this is when I was asked to be on the TV show America's Got Talent. There was just one problem. At the time, the producers of the show expected magicians to perform big, flashy, Vegas-type illusions, which I didn't do. Now, the reason that America's Got Talent wanted these types of acts was because the show was being taped in front of 6,000 people at Radio City Music Hall, and they wanted the show to feel huge. But I noticed that none of the magicians ever made it past the first few rounds. So I started analyzing why. I mean, their acts look great in front of the 6,000 people in the audience, but to the millions of people who are watching on TV at home and then voting, there was a disconnect between the performer. Again, I analyzed why. Well, television is really an intimate medium. And the best kind of magic for television is close-up magic, because it too is intimate. It draws the viewer in. So armed with this new insight, I realized the answer was right in front of me. It was literally hiding in plain sight. I didn't need to perform big, flashy, Vegas-type illusions. I needed to do small, close-up, intimate performances that would blow the minds of the judges and the people watching at home. Now, it took a bit of convincing to get the producers to agree to this whole thing. They definitely did not see it the way that I did at that time. But once I was able to refocus their attention back to what they already knew, which is that television is intimate, therefore the magic act should be intimate as well, they said, okay, let's do it. And it was a paradigm-shifting way for magic to be done on America's Got Talent. And I actually became the first magician to ever make it into the finals on that show. Thank you. Now, it all happened because I was able to shift the producers' expectations of what they thought would work. So right now, it's time for me to shift yours. As I mentioned earlier, throughout this entire talk, I've given you 2 clues to the problems I'm about to show you right now. Now, you may or may not have noticed them, and if you didn't, here's a little hint. If you go back and watch this again, you'll notice that every time I touch my key, say the answer is hiding in plain sight, I would point to the clue that you will need to quickly solve these next 2 problems. Now, there's a chance you probably just didn't even notice it, that you perceived the touching of my key just an irrelevant gesture. You didn't expect such a simple action could contain the answer to what you perceived as a much more complicated problem. So here are the challenges. The first one: how do you drink champagne from the bottle without opening it? Immediately, your mind will start thinking of all these different solutions, most of which probably have to do with a complicated way of getting the cork off and getting the champagne out without actually opening up the bottle. Keep thinking. The next one here involves 2 glasses, a dollar bill suspended between them, and a salt shaker. And the challenge is to get the salt shaker to balance on top of the dollar bill while staying suspended, so when you let go, it won't drop down to the table. Again, the answer is probably a lot easier than you think. And also, if you want to learn these, all you got to do is watch this again and look for the times when I touch my key, point, and say the answer is hiding in plain sight. Now, this here is actually what people would consider a bar bet. So if you're familiar with magic and puzzles, you probably recognize it. And it uses the exact same principles that magicians have been using all along. If you had a bit of difficulty like figuring it out, don't worry. Because it's actually much easier to fool a really intelligent person than someone who maybe isn't quite as sophisticated. I got you. But it's really true. It's actually very difficult to fool children. And I'll explain why. For a really sophisticated person, you will almost always talk yourself out of the simple solution. Even though it's the right solution, your misconception will cause you to overlook the obvious. Now, this also has you create a false set of assumptions. For example, a child will see a lady floating in the air and say, yeah, well, there are strings holding her up. A more sophisticated person would say, but see, I can't see any strings. Plus, it would take a lot of strings to support the weight of a person. They utilize information based upon prior knowledge and experience, and they don't go beyond those parameters. And finally, they create a false set of expectations. Because the magician passed a hoop around the lady, they allow this one simple action to blind them from the truth. It's the perfect example of misconceptions, assumptions, and expectations all working against you, all stopping you from achieving your goal. But once you master these principles, you will be able to unleash the answers and realize the benefits that are always hiding in plain sight. Thank you. Thank you all so much.